Oh, who is this guy named Jesus everybody's talking about? I don't know everybody here, but I know one fact about every single person in the room in this moment. And that is that you are courageous. You are willing to explore what spirituality is, what God is, what Jesus is, beyond what traditional religion tells us those things are. And so it takes some courage for you to be here in this room, willing to ask those questions. Or maybe some of you are here by mistake, and you walked in accidentally, and we'll try to make it as entertaining as possible as we can for you. We're just going to ask a few questions. That's all we're going to do. Nobody ever got killed over asking a few questions, right? Oh. Well, there was that little thing about the Spanish Inquisition and like the whole Middle Ages and the Taliban now. And so I guess a few people have been killed about asking questions. But one of my objectives today will be that every single person here leaves alive. So we're just going to ask some questions. So who was this Jesus guy? And why should we care? So we should go to the source, right? There's this book called the Bible. Exhibit A. This is actually the Bible I got when I was 10 years old from Irving North Christian Church in Texas. You can see it has not gotten a lot of use. And one of the things I love about Unity is that they take the Bible not literally, but they use it as an opportunity to look at it metaphysically, which means beyond the literal translation, to look at it symbolically. What could we learn or get out of these stories by applying them to our own life and see what symbolism it might have that might teach us something? And that's wonderful. That's a great way to get beyond some of the difficulties and inconsistencies in the Bible. But you can also read the newspaper metaphysically. In fact, sometimes I would recommend it. It's much more entertaining that way. So I wanted to go to the source and find out the question of who really was Jesus. And so I'm not a Bible scholar and not even a regular Bible reader. So I thought that I would go to someone who was and is a Bible scholar. And some of you may have heard of this man. His name is John Shelby Spong, and he wrote a book called Jesus for the Non-Religious. And we'll talk a little bit about why he picked that particular title in a moment. But why should we even believe John Shelby Spong? Well, let me tell you a little bit about him. He graduated from Divinity School in 1955, and he was ordained as an Episcopal priest, and he was promoted to bishop. He was the youngest person at the time to be promoted to bishop in the Episcopal Church. He went on in 1973, he began writing books. He's written over 21 books about the Bible and about Jesus and about Christianity. And after that first book, he never got promoted again. Something about what he was writing about, the Episcopal Church wasn't real happy about. But he has been able to stir up enough trouble that it seems like it's worth asking the question of what did he find in the Bible after studying it for 50 years. He's been a visiting professor at Harvard, so he's probably got something that we might want to listen to. But more importantly, to learn about Bishop Spong is his own personal story. And he will tell you that he was born into a family with an alcoholic father. who passed away when he was 12 years old. And his poor mother was forced into poverty by trying to support the children with a 9th grade education. And so when John Shelby Spong was growing up, he wanted and did believe in a God that was a person outside of himself. It was comforting and secure to know that there was somebody up there in the heavens that was looking down upon him at every moment. And if he just did exactly what the Bible said, then everything would be okay. Haven't we all had those times when life seems overwhelming and when we'd like some security of just knowing that somebody would always be there, that we could reach out and ask for help? So John Shelby Spong loved the Bible and loved Christianity so much that he decided to go and become an Episcopal priest. But part of that process, of course, was going to seminary. And in seminary, he suddenly became face-to-face with some of the Bible scholarship that has grown extensively over the last 200 years. We know a lot more about what was written in the Bible, how it was written, who probably wrote it, when it was written, than we did 200 years ago. And so as Bishop Spong began to read these scholarly works and compare it to this literal translation that he had been given the Bible, he started to run into a lot of trouble. And he started asking questions. And this book that he wrote about Jesus is a culmination of his 50 years of studying the Bible. And what he found is he wanted to go and find out, what exactly did this guy do that was so special? So the first thing he does is he takes all the information in the New Testament and he lays it out chronologically, because the way it normally appears in the Bible is not the time sequence in which it was actually written. So the very first information that we have written down was written in about 50 AD. So about 20 years after the time that Jesus died. So 20 years ago, if something happened in your life, you can probably remember. You have pretty good memory about what it was. You can remember most of the details. So one would assume that the writings that were the closest to the time after his death might have some real insights for us as to what exactly this guy was all about. And when he did this, chronologically, he found that as time went on, the story of Jesus and who he was got more fantastic, more magical, more amazing, because people were actually teaching the story of Jesus in the synagogues. So one of the things that Spong encourages us to consider is that Jesus was a Jew, and he did his teachings in great extent in the synagogue. So if we can understand what he was doing in the context in which he was doing it, we can better understand what was probably added on later and what was so different that one wouldn't assume would have been there. So, for example, if you extract out all the prophecies that happen later on, like in the book of John, where they start to talk about born of a virgin birth, that he was destined to do this. He was born in Bethlehem, right? We all know that. Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Nah. Why did they call him Jesus of Nazareth then? Did he just like move around a lot? He was kind of a shady character? It turns out that it was most likely that they wanted to place his birth in Bethlehem because that was the city of David. That was the Jewish city where he was the prophecy that the Messiah was going to be from. So they had to rig up all these stories about there's a census and Mary's on the burro, and they had to make up all these stories to get him out of Nazareth, which was apparently like a podunk town, probably like Topeka. Messiahs don't come from Topeka. They come from Bethlehem, this great city. And so we can start to see how the disciples afterwards and the people preaching about Jesus had a reason why they wanted to ship and shape and change a few little things in order to make the story fit the Old Testament. So you can extract out those stories because there's many things that we can find in there that aren't true. In fact, when you read this book, it's like a detective novel. What's that famous crime show? What's the popular crime show? CSI. It's like CSI Jerusalem. We're going to get to the bottom of this. If they had only had DNA testing back then. So it's fascinating to read the actual historical, separating out all the other stuff that got added and going back, what actually happened? And when you extract all that out, you find some interesting thing. There's one other just wonderful tidbit that I just love so much. It's the story about the leafy branch. One of the things they wanted to do is, once again, the disciples are preaching in the synagogues, and Jewish tradition already had high holy days. They already had times when things were happening, like Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, and Passover, which was a big to-do. Well, when the disciples came and were going to preach during Passover, they needed something to talk about. And so they wanted to place the crucifixion and resurrection at the time of Passover so that now they would have a Jesus story to tell instead of the Jewish story to tell. Makes sense, right? Well, then you run into a little bit of problems. The most recent writings, those writings that happened in 50 years, in 20 years after his death, the first writing says that when he came into town, they laid down leafy branches so that it made it easier for the burro to go across. But in March and early April, the trees have not budded out yet. Aha. So a little later on, in a writing in the 70s and the 80s, then they changed to just branch. That should solve the problem. But then by the time you get to John, it had to be a palm tree branch, because palm trees are, what's it when they're always there? Evergreen, thank you. Yes, evergreen, they're evergreen. That solves the problem. Then we can have the resurrection. He could have died whenever we wanted him to. Isn't that wonderful? So you find these little inconsistencies when you start to look at the facts chronologically. But the important point is when you extract all out the prophecy, when you extract all out the inconsistencies, what was it that Jesus was doing was so special that people wanted to preach about it for years and decades and centuries? And you find some amazing things that would have been unbelievable for anybody to do it in that culture at that time. What Jesus was talking about is nothing short of an evolution of human consciousness. He broke the barrier of tribal systems. Imagine living at that time when the safety and security depended on you being in a particular tribe, the 12 tribes. You had to have a tribe. In order to have a tribe, you had to have somebody who was outside of the tribe. You stuck together because it was them versus us. It was fear-based religion in that time. I'm afraid, and so I need something that makes me feel secure. And Jesus threw all of that away. He would, oh my gosh, he would preach to anybody. Heaven forbid, he got beyond all prejudices. He would preach and had women disciples. Blasphemy. That was blasphemous at the time. Women were chattel. Women were property. Women didn't have any being, and yet Jesus was willing to not only allow women to hear his stories, but he allowed them to be his disciples. That was radical stuff, man. That was stuff that, what can we learn from that today? Who are we holding prejudices against today that we could get beyond in order to be able to go beyond our tribal system, beyond our country, to think of the whole human race as our family? That was radical thinking at his time. But even more radical than that was he was willing to go beyond religion. Because if you look at religion in most cases, it's about dogma and doctrine and righteousness and clean and unclean. People are in or people are out. You're either going to heaven or you're going to hell. That wasn't what Jesus was talking about at all. He said the kingdom of heaven was right here for everyone. And for these things, he was crucified. Turned out probably nobody was there. Most likely the disciples freaked out and ran away. And then they realized that there was something beyond Jesus as the person that they had learned that was worth carrying on with. And that was these three things that Jesus taught. And that was first, that you can live abundantly. We can know, we don't have to look at life as the scarcity. We don't have to live in fear and see that there's not enough and feel that sense of concern and worry and anxiety. If we open up to the abundance of life, life can be amazing. That was one of the things that Jesus taught. And secondly, he taught to love wastefully. Give it away. Love everybody. That is radical thinking. Well, imagine if you loved everybody, even the people who didn't believe your political perspective. I'm just saying, give it a try. So we can live abundantly and we can love wastefully. And the third most important is that we allow ourselves to be who we were born to be. You are a unique and special person. Nobody like you has ever existed or will ever exist. You are called upon in this life to be who you were born to be. How wonderful is that? So imagine if we ourselves could do these three things, how Christ-like we would be. So I was thinking that when I was growing up, there was a hymn that said, stand up for Jesus. So I invite you to stand up. And imagine in this moment, you're not standing up for Jesus, but you are standing up as Jesus. You have within you that Christ spirit. Just feel that in this moment. You have everything that Jesus had. And you can sit. And as you sit, just let that sink in. Sink in that you have every single thing at your disposal that Jesus had as well. The ability to live abundantly, to love wastefully, and to be who you were born to be. So as we go into meditation, let's take these questions about how you might apply the principles that Jesus taught in your everyday life. take a few slow, full, deep breaths, breathing in and breathing out, counting to 6. Just allowing everything to slow down. Allow yourself to be present in this moment. Surely the presence of God is in this place. God as an experience, as presence. And allow that presence to be felt. And we can take this time to reflect upon these 3 teachings of Jesus. Ask ourselves the question first, how can I live my life abundantly? Letting go of any sense of scarcity, going beyond worry or anxiety, finding that courage that is within each and every one of us to see things from a higher level of consciousness. How can I see myself and the world in abundance? And we can also ask ourselves, how can I love wastefully? Who am I holding at arm's length as an enemy? Who do I feel in conflict with? And how might I go beyond that conflict to love them anyway? As well as loving myself. Love has the power that as it is given away, more is created. It is limitless, infinite. And lastly, how can I be this person that I was born to be? This unique, special, valuable being that is here on this earth to make a difference and to be myself. So we can ponder these 3 questions in the silence. And so as we leave the silence, we can take with us this deep sense of knowing that within us, within each and every single one of us, there is this incredible power and presence, our Christ consciousness, to live an abundant, loving, and valuable life. And so it is.
God is love, and we who abide in Him abide in love, and God in us. God is love. God